In the quiet town of Pinewood Springs, where the forest whispers secrets and shadows fall early. A biologist by trade, Emma Sullivan preferred the gentle solitude of the Shenandoah wilderness to the chaos of human connection. But one moonlit night, her peaceful world shattered, replaced by fear, by struggle, and by a moment that would test everything she believed about the wild. Pinned beneath the weight of a man's intentions. Just when hope seems lost and terror grips her heart, an unlikely protector emerges from the shadows. A blur of fur. A snarl torn from the heart of the forest. And suddenly, the hunter became the hunted. What happens when nature itself intervenes in a twist of fate no one could foresee? This is the story of an unlikely protector. A stunning reminder that sometimes the kindness we show the wild returns to us in the most incredible ways. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The setting sun cast long shadows across the small town of Pinewood Springs, nestled at the edge of the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. Emma Sullivan, a 32-year-old wildlife biologist with the local conservation department, locked the door to her office with a weary sigh. Another long day of budget meetings and paperwork had left her yearning for the simplicity of fieldwork, the reason she'd chosen this career in the first place. "Have a good weekend," Emma called her colleague, Dan, from across the parking lot. Emma waved back with a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "You too. Any plans?" "Taking the kids camping up near Thornton Gap. You should join us sometime, get back into nature." Emma nodded politely, but they both knew she wouldn't accept. Since her divorce 3 years ago, Emma had retreated into herself, focusing entirely on her work and gradually disconnecting from the social circles she once enjoyed. Her weekends were now spent alone in her modest cabin at the edge of town, grading papers from the community college course she taught on environmental conservation or catching up on research. "Maybe next time," she called back, the familiar words feeling hollow in her mouth. The drive home was short, just enough time for Emma to decompress and plan her evening. A simple dinner, maybe a glass of wine, and a few chapters of the novel that had been sitting untouched on her nightstand for weeks. As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Claire. "Mom's asking about Thanksgiving again. Please tell me you're coming this year?" Emma sighed. Another family gathering she'd have to navigate alone, fielding questions about her love life and career choices from well-meaning relatives. She set the phone down without responding, promising herself she'd deal with it tomorrow. Inside her cabin, Emma kicked off her shoes and changed into more comfortable clothes, worn jeans and a faded blue sweater that had seen better days. She moved to the kitchen, pulling vegetables from the refrigerator for a simple stir-fry, when her gaze fell on the framed photograph hanging on the wall, a younger version of herself, smiling broadly as she knelt beside a wire cage containing a small, tawny bobcat kitten with bright amber eyes and a distinctive white patch on its right ear. The memory came flooding back, as it often did when she looked at that photo. It had been almost 8 years ago, during her first year as a wildlife rehabilitation specialist with the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center. The bobcat kitten had been found alone, severely wounded with a deep gash on its hind leg, likely separated from its mother after an encounter with a coyote or perhaps a trap set by a local farmer. Emma had named him Rufus, though the center's policy discouraged naming animals to prevent attachment. For 6 weeks, she had nursed the little fighter back to health, marveling at his resilience and the fierce dignity he maintained even while injured. Unlike other wild animals she'd treated, Rufus never fully feared her. He'd watch her with those intelligent amber eyes, seeming to understand she was trying to help. The day they released him back into the wild had been bittersweet. Emma remembered standing at the edge of the forest, opening the carrier door, and watching the young Bobcat take hesitant steps toward freedom. He had paused at the tree line, turning back to look at her one last time before disappearing into the underbrush. That moment had cemented Emma's dedication to wildlife conservation, a memory she held close during difficult days. The harsh buzz of her phone startled Emma from her reverie. Her sister again. "Seriously, Em, just say yes. Mom's getting older and she misses you. We all do." With a pang of guilt, Emma typed back, "I'll think about it. Promise." She set her phone down and finished preparing her dinner, eating alone at her small kitchen table while scrolling through emails on her tablet. One message caught her attention, a request from the community center to give a presentation on local wildlife next month. It would mean more work, but also a chance to share her passion with others, perhaps inspire a new generation of conservationists. Emma marked it as unread, promising herself she'd consider it over the weekend. After dinner, restlessness settled over her. The walls of her cabin seemed to close in, the silence too complete. On impulse, Emma grabbed her jacket and flashlight. A walk would clear her head, and the full moon provided enough light to navigate the trail behind her cabin that led to Wilson's Creek, her favorite thinking spot. The crisp October air filled her lungs as Emma followed the familiar path, listening to the nocturnal sounds of the forest coming alive around her. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and small creatures rustled in the underbrush. These sounds had always comforted her, a reminder that she was part of something larger than herself and her problems. Reaching the creek, Emma settled on a smooth boulder and gazed at the water reflecting moonlight. How had her life become so isolated? After the divorce, she'd thrown herself into work, telling herself it was temporary, just until she healed. But 3 years had passed, and here she was, alone on a Friday night, avoiding her family and keeping colleagues at arm's length. Lost in thought, Emma didn't immediately register the sound of footsteps approaching from the path behind her. When she did, a chill ran down her spine. Nobody else usually came to this secluded spot, especially not after dark. She turned, holding up her flashlight, relief washing over her when she recognized the figure approaching. "Jason, you startled me." Jason Miller worked at the local hardware store and occasionally did maintenance work around town. Emma had hired him last summer to fix her leaking roof. "Am I right?" His voice sounded strange, slightly slurred. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here." Something felt off. Jason was standing too close, swaying slightly, and Emma caught the sharp scent of alcohol. She stood up, gathering her belongings. "I was just heading back," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's getting late." Jason stepped closer, blocking her path to the trail. "Why the rush? Beautiful night for a chat, don't you think?" His tone had shifted, an edge to it that made Emma's heartbeat quicken. "I need to get home," Emma replied, trying to move past him, but Jason grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Come on, just a little company. You're always alone in that cabin. Don't you get lonely?" His words slurred together, his grip tightening. Fear crystallized in Emma's chest as she realized the danger she was in. They were a good half-mile from the nearest house, and her phone was in her jacket pocket, impossible to reach without Jason noticing. "Let go of me, Jason," she demanded, trying to wrench her arm free. "Now." Instead of releasing her, Jason pulled her closer, his other hand reaching into his pocket. The metallic glint of a switchblade caught the moonlight, sending ice through Emma's veins. "Give me your wallet," he growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "And that fancy watch, too." Emma's mind raced. The watch had been a gift from her father before he passed. She couldn't bear to lose it. "Jason, you don't want to do this. People know I'm out here. They'll come looking." He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the creek. "No, they won't. Everyone knows Emma Sullivan likes to be alone. Now give me your stuff before this gets ugly." Emma tried to break free again, this time managing to twist away from his grasp. But as she turned to run, her foot caught on a rock, and she stumbled, falling hard onto the ground. Pain shot through her elbow as it connected with the stony path. Jason was on her in an instant, flipping her onto her back, the knife now pressed against her throat. Emma froze, terror paralyzing her as she felt the cold blade against her skin. "Should have made this easy," Jason muttered, his free hand roughly going through her pockets, extracting her wallet. He squinted at her wrist in the moonlight. Now the watch. Emma's fingers trembled as she unclasped her father's watch, grief mingling with fear as she handed it over. Jason pocketed both items, but he didn't move away. Instead, his eyes roamed over her face and body in a way that sent a new wave of dread through Emma. "You know," he said, leaning closer, the stench of alcohol on his breath making her stomach turn. "I always thought you were stuck up, living out here all alone, thinking you're better than everyone else." "Please," Emma whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You have what you wanted. Just go." Jason's grip on her shoulder tightened painfully. Not quite everything. In that moment, Emma gave up struggling. Her mind detached, a survival mechanism kicking in as she faced the horrible realization of what might happen next. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. Then, without warning, a guttural scream tore through the night. Not human, but wild and fierce. Emma's eyes flew open just as a tawny blur launched itself from the shadows, colliding with Jason's back. Jason howled in pain and surprise, the knife falling from his hand as he was knocked sideways. Emma scrambled away, watching in shock as a full-grown bobcat, nearly twice the size of a house cat, clawed at her attacker, its sharp teeth bared in a snarl. Jason flailed wildly, trying to dislodge the animal from his back. "Get it off! Get it off me!" he screamed, staggering toward the creek. In his panic, Jason lost his footing on the slippery bank and went down hard, his head connecting with the edge of a large rock at the water's edge. The sound of the impact made Emma wince, and Jason went limp, the bobcat leaping clear as he collapsed. For a moment, the only sounds were Emma's ragged breathing and the soft gurgle of the creek. The bobcat stood perfectly still, just a few feet away from Jason's unconscious form, its sides heaving with exertion. Emma remained frozen, unsure if she was in danger from the wild predator. But as she watched, the bobcat turned toward her, and Emma gasped. In the moonlight, she could clearly see a distinctive white patch on its right ear and a faint, silvery scar running down its hind leg. Rufus. The name escaped her lips before she could stop it. The bobcat, could it really be the same one, watched her with familiar amber eyes, making no move to approach or retreat. A strange sense of recognition passed between them, a moment suspended in time. Whether it was the same animal she had rescued years ago or a bizarre coincidence, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this wild creature had intentionally intervened to save her. The spell broke when Jason groaned, stirring slightly. The bobcat's ears flattened, and with one last look at Emma, it turned and bounded into the forest, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Emma didn't waste time wondering. She hurried to retrieve her wallet and watch from Jason's pockets, then struggled to drag him away from the water where he might drown if left unconscious. Despite what he'd done, she couldn't leave him to die. Using her cell phone, she called 911, reporting both the attack and Jason's injury. "Stay where you are, ma'am," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers and an ambulance are on the way." The wait for help seemed endless. Emma kept her distance from Jason, who occasionally groaned but didn't fully regain consciousness. Her mind replayed the attack and the bobcat's timely intervention, wondering at the improbability of it all. Was it possible that the animal she had saved had somehow recognized her? Had it been watching her all this time? The scientific part of her brain rejected the notion. Bobcats were solitary creatures with large territories, and while they had excellent memories, the idea that one would specifically recognize and defend a human years later seemed far-fetched. And yet, those eyes, that distinctive white patch, the scar, The sound of approaching sirens pulled Emma from her thoughts. Soon, the quiet forest trail was ablaze with flashlights as paramedics attended to Jason and police officers took Emma's statement. "You're saying a bobcat attacked him?" Officer Collins asked, his pen poised over his notepad, skepticism evident in his voice. "Yes," Emma replied firmly. "It jumped on him when he—" She faltered, the reality of what had nearly happened hitting her anew. The officer's expression softened. "Take your time, Miss Sullivan." Emma took a deep breath and continued, explaining how Jason had threatened her with a knife, stolen her belongings, and implied worse was to come. She described how the bobcat had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, causing Jason to fall and hit his head. "And you believe this might be the same bobcat you rehabilitated years ago?" Officer Collins asked, his eyebrows raised. Put that way, it did sound far-fetched. Emma hesitated. I'm not sure. It had similar markings. Could be a coincidence." Officer Collins nodded, closing his notepad. "Well, coincidence or not, you're lucky. Jason Miller has been on our radar for a while. Petty theft, drunk and disorderly. This is a significant escalation, though. We'll be charging him with armed robbery and assault, at minimum." As the paramedics loaded Jason into the ambulance, another officer approached, holding an evidence bag. "Found these in his pocket, ma'am. Your wallet and watch." Emma nodded gratefully, reclaiming her belongings. Her father's watch was unharmed, and she clasped it back around her wrist, taking comfort in its familiar weight. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement," Officer Collins told her. "And I'd strongly advise against walking these trails alone at night in the future." "I understand," Emma replied, though she wasn't sure she could stay away. This place had always been her sanctuary. After the police and paramedics departed, an officer drove Emma back to her cabin. The events of the night had left her shaken but also strangely alert, as if she was seeing her surroundings with new clarity. Inside, Emma made herself a cup of strong tea and sat by the window, looking out at the dark forest beyond her yard. Was Rufus, if it was indeed Rufus, out there watching? The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Sleep eluded her that night. When dawn finally broke, Emma made a decision. She picked up her phone and called her sister. "Claire? It's me. Yes, I know it's early. Listen, about Thanksgiving, I'll be there. I promise." She paused, listening to her sister's surprised but delighted response. "Actually, I was wondering if you wanted to meet for lunch this weekend? We have a lot to catch up on." After ending the call, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. She showered, dressed, and packed a small bag with field equipment, binoculars, a notepad, her camera with the telephoto lens. Then she headed back to the creek, this time in broad daylight. The scene of last night's attack looked different in the morning light, peaceful, almost as if nothing had happened. Emma set up her equipment on the same boulder where she had sat before being interrupted by Jason. If the bobcat was nearby, if it really was Rufus keeping watch over this territory that included her cabin, she wanted to document it properly. Hours passed with no sign of the elusive predator. Emma was about to pack up when movement caught her eye, a flash of tawny fur between the trees on the opposite bank. She raised her camera, hardly daring to breathe, and waited. The bobcat emerged cautiously into a patch of sunlight, and Emma's heart leaped. There was the white patch on its right ear, unmistakable through her camera lens. The animal paused, as if sensing her presence, and turned its head. Emma took several rapid photos as the bobcat surveyed the creek, its gaze eventually landing on her. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the water. Emma whispered a quiet, "Thank you," feeling slightly foolish but needing to express her gratitude nonetheless. The bobcat's ears twitched, and then, with deliberate movements, it settled onto a sun-warmed rock, much like Emma's on the opposite bank. It began to groom itself, seemingly unconcerned by her presence. Emma continued taking photos, documenting every detail of the magnificent creature that had saved her life. In the weeks that followed, Emma's life underwent a transformation. Jason Miller was charged and held without bail, his attack on Emma having violated his probation for previous offenses. Emma gave her statement to the police and, with the encouragement of her therapist, began to process the trauma of the attack. But it wasn't all darkness. Emma found herself reconnecting with old friends and family, sharing the incredible story of her rescue by a bobcat that might or might not have been the same one she had rehabilitated years ago. She accepted the invitation to speak at the community center, turning it into a presentation about local bobcat conservation efforts, complete with her recent photographs of her bobcat, as she had come to think of it. The presentation was a success, drawing unexpected attention from local media and conservation groups. Emma found herself being interviewed for the local newspaper, and soon after, a regional wildlife magazine expressed interest in her story and her work. "Do you really believe it's the same bobcat?" reporters would inevitably ask. Emma's answer became practiced. "Science tells us it's unlikely. Bobcats typically live solitary lives and don't form attachments to humans. But there are things in nature we still don't fully understand, connections and complexities beyond our current knowledge. What I know for certain is that I was helped when I needed it most, and that experience has reminded me of why I do this work." Thanksgiving arrived, and for the first time in 3 years, Emma found herself surrounded by family, sharing stories and laughter around her mother's crowded dining table. When asked about her plans for the future, Emma surprised herself by mentioning a new project she was developing, a community education program on living harmoniously with local wildlife, including the often misunderstood bobcat population. "I'm thinking of calling it the Rufus Initiative," she explained, to curious looks from her relatives. As winter settled over Pinewood Springs, Emma continued to occasionally spot her bobcat during her now regular but always daylight visits to the creek. She never approached it, respecting the wild nature of the creature, but she sensed an unusual tolerance from the animal, a mutual acknowledgement of shared territory. One snowy December evening, as Emma sat by her fireplace grading papers, a soft sound drew her attention to the window. Outside, standing at the edge of her yard where the forest began, was the bobcat. Its tawny coat stood out against the snow, its breath visible in the cold air. Emma moved slowly to the window, careful not to make sudden movements. The bobcat watched her, those amber eyes reflecting the warm light from her cabin. It made no move to approach or retreat, simply standing sentinel in the gathering darkness. "Thank you, Rufus," Emma whispered against the glass. As if hearing her, the bobcat blinked slowly, a gesture that, in domesticated cats, signified trust and affection. Then it turned and melted back into the forest, leaving only tracks in the fresh snow as evidence of its visit. Emma remained by the window long after the bobcat disappeared, filled with a profound sense of connection not just to this one animal, but to the natural world she had dedicated her life to protecting. In saving her, the bobcat had also, in a way, saved itself and countless others like it, as Emma's renewed passion and public platform allowed her to advocate more effectively for wildlife conservation. The encounter had shown her that the boundaries between humans and wild animals, while necessary to respect, were perhaps more permeable than she had believed. That kindness could flow in both directions across that divide, creating unexpected bonds that transcended species. As Emma finally turned away from the window, her phone pinged with a text from Claire. "Community Center called. They've had so many requests for your next talk that they're moving it to the high school auditorium." "Famous much?" Emma smiled, typing back, "Not famous. Just lucky to have a very special co-presenter, even if he never actually shows up." Setting her phone down, Emma returned to her grading, but her mind kept drifting to the bobcat's visit and the strange, wonderful turn her life had taken. She had spent years healing animals, never expecting that one day, one might heal her in return, not physically, but by reminding her of her connection to others. both human and wild. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the bobcat's tracks, but Emma knew it was out there, moving through the forest that they both, in their own ways, called home. And for the first time in years, Emma felt she was exactly where she belonged, part of an intricate web of relationships, seen and unseen, that made life meaningful. In saving each other, the woman who healed a wounded bobcat kitten and the grown bobcat who stopped an attacker, they had both found a path back to the world, a reminder that sometimes the kindness we show returns to us in ways we never could have imagined.
Under the cool light of a crisp autumn morning, an ancient courthouse stands as a silent witness to secrets and surprises that defy all expectations. Standing there, a 10-year-old girl with auburn hair and determined blue eyes. But it's not the child who causes every person in the room to gasp. It's what walks beside her. The animal, with its gleaming tawny coat and piercing amber eyes, strides by her side as if it were a cherished family member rather than a creature of the wild. Animals are not permitted in this courtroom, the judge declares. The judge, a seasoned pillar of the law, is caught between skepticism and wonder as he listens to the girl's impassioned plea. A plea rooted in loss, legacy, and the belief that sometimes nature chooses its own family. Sometimes the rules must be broken to serve a higher purpose. Join us on a journey into a world where the rules are rewritten, and where every heartbeat in that courtroom pulses with a mystery that is as profound as it is unexpected. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The Jefferson County Courthouse had seen its fair share of unusual cases throughout its 100-year history, but nothing quite like what unfolded on that crisp autumn morning. The ancient maple trees outside the stately brick building had begun to shed their crimson and gold leaves, and the morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge William Anderson, a man with 40 years of legal experience etched into the lines of his weathered face, peered over his wire-rimmed glasses at the day's docket. After 3 decades on the bench, he thought he'd seen it all: custody battles, property disputes, civil disagreements that had festered into bitter lawsuits. But case number 47-29B was unlike anything he'd encountered before. Walker versus State Wildlife Commission, appeal for custody of wildlife. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the heavy oak doors swung open. The usual routine of the court was disrupted by a collective gasp that rippled through the room. Standing in the doorway was a small figure, a girl no more than 10 years old, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a simple blue dress that matched her determined eyes. But it wasn't the child that caused the stir, it was what walked beside her. Padding silently at her side was a bobcat, its tawny coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, tufted ears alert, and amber eyes surveying the room with quiet intelligence. The animal wasn't caged or leashed, but walked freely next to the child, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Order. Order in the court. Judge Anderson's gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Security officers tensed, hands hovering near their weapons, uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented situation. "Young lady," the judge addressed the girl, his voice stern but not unkind. "I believe there's been some misunderstanding. Animals, especially wild ones, are not permitted in this courtroom." The girl stepped forward, her small shoulders squared with resolve. "Your Honor, my name is Sarah Walker. This is Max, and he's the reason I'm here today." Her voice was clear and unwavering, surprising in its maturity for someone so young. "I received the court summons. I understand I'm not supposed to have a lawyer, but I'm representing myself in this appeal." Judge Anderson's eyebrows rose in surprise. In his 4 decades of legal practice, he'd never encountered a child acting as her own counsel. And where are your parents, Miss Walker? A shadow passed over Sarah's face. My mother passed away when I was 4, Your Honor. My father. Her voice caught slightly, but she composed herself with a deep breath. My father died 3 months ago. My Aunt Clara is my guardian now, but she's waiting outside. She said this was my fight. The judge's expression softened slightly. I see. And she allowed you to bring a wild animal into a public building. Max isn't dangerous, Your Honor, Sarah replied, glancing down at the bobcat who sat perfectly still beside her, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face. He's family. From the prosecution table, a man in a crisp government suit rose to his feet. Richard Thompson, the regional director of the State Wildlife Commission, cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may, this is precisely the issue at hand. That animal, he pointed accusingly at Max, causing several spectators to flinch as if expecting the bobcat to lunge, is a wild predator, not a pet or family member. It belongs in a wildlife sanctuary or its natural habitat, not in a residential home with a child. The bobcat's ears twitched at the man's sharp tone, but otherwise, it remained completely calm, surprising everyone in the courtroom. Its behavior was far from what anyone would expect from a wild animal in such an unfamiliar and tense environment. Mr. Thompson, Judge Anderson addressed the official. While I appreciate your concern, I'd like to hear what Miss Walker has to say. This is, after all, her appeal. He turned back to Sarah. Young lady, do you understand why the State Wildlife Commission wants to relocate your Max? Sarah nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. They believe wild animals should remain wild, and that keeping Max is dangerous for both him and me. She took a small step forward. But they don't understand. Max isn't just any bobcat, and our situation isn't ordinary. Enlighten us, then, the judge said, settling back in his chair, genuine curiosity replacing his initial alarm. Sarah took a deep breath, her hand resting gently on Max's head, who leaned slightly into her touch. My father was Daniel Walker. He worked for the Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation Center in the Shenandoah Valley. He dedicated his life to saving animals, rehabilitating them, and releasing them back to the wild. Recognition flickered in Judge Anderson's eyes. The wildlife rescuer who died in the Jefferson Forest fire last summer. Sarah nodded, her blue eyes growing misty. 3 months ago, there was a wildfire that spread through the eastern ridge. Dad got a call that several animals were trapped. He went in even though the fire was getting worse. Her voice grew quieter. He managed to rescue several animals, but then he found Max's mother. She was badly injured, and there was a tiny cub next to her. That was Max. The courtroom was completely silent now, every person hanging on the young girl's words. Dad tried to save them both, but the fire was closing in. Sarah swallowed hard. He didn't make it out. The firefighters found him the next day. He had wrapped Max in his jacket to protect him from the smoke and heat. His mother didn't survive. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained resolute. Your Honor, while this is undoubtedly a tragic story, it doesn't change the fact that bobcats are wild animals that require specialized care and environments. They can be unpredictable and dangerous, especially as they mature. Sarah's eyes flashed with determination. Max was only 3 weeks old when Dad found him. I've bottle-fed him, watched him grow, taught him how to be gentle. He's never shown any aggression toward people. She looked down at the bobcat with unmistakable affection. Dad was teaching me everything about wildlife rescue. He always said that sometimes, in very special cases, animals choose to stay with us. The judge considered her words carefully. Miss Walker, while your story is touching, the law is clear about ownership of native wildlife. What makes you believe an exception should be made in this case? Sarah straightened up. Because Max isn't a pet, Your Honor. He's free to come and go as he pleases. We have 10 acres of land that borders the national forest. He has a cat door to the outdoors, and he often goes into the woods to explore. But he always comes back. She reached into a small backpack she carried and pulled out a binder. I've documented everything about Max's care, his diet, his health checkups with Dr. Holloway at the Wildlife Center, his behavior patterns. Dad taught me that proper documentation is important in wildlife rehabilitation. Judge Anderson gestured for the bailiff to bring him the binder. As he flipped through the meticulously kept records, complete with photographs, notes, and even signed statements from veterinarians, his expression grew increasingly impressed. I've also brought something else, Your Honor, Sarah continued, pulling out a sealed envelope. This is my father's last will and testament. In it, he specifically requested that Max remain in my care, with Aunt Clara's supervision, of course. He believed that Max had formed a special bond with me. As the judge examined the document, Thompson rose again. Your Honor, while the court might consider the deceased's wishes, they cannot override state wildlife regulations designed to protect both people and animals. Miss Walker is only 10 years old. Regardless of her father's training, she cannot possibly provide appropriate care for a predator species. Mr. Thompson, Sarah responded before the judge could speak. Would you like to see how Max responds to me? The wildlife official looked momentarily taken aback, but nodded curtly. Sarah turned to the Bobcat and whispered something that was inaudible to the rest of the courtroom. Immediately, Max stood, walked several paces away, and sat down, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Lie down, she said softly. The Bobcat immediately complied, stretching out on the courtroom floor. Roll over. Again, Max obeyed instantly, rolling onto his back and then back to his stomach. What happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom. Sarah moved her hand in a barely perceptible gesture, and Max walked to the prosecutor's table, sat beside a very stiff Mr. Thompson, and gently placed one paw on the table's edge, looking expectantly at the man. He wants to shake your hand, Sarah explained with the hint of a smile. Dad taught him that's how we greet new friends. Thompson looked at the extended paw with a mixture of fear and amazement. After a moment's hesitation, he tentatively touched the Bobcat's paw, earning an approving blink from Max. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the courtroom. As you can see, Your Honor, Sarah continued as Max returned to her side. Max understands commands and is well socialized. He's not a danger to anyone. Judge Anderson was about to respond when a commotion erupted outside the courtroom. The doors burst open, and a police officer rushed in, his face flushed with urgency. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation in the parking garage. A wild animal has been spotted, possibly injured and definitely agitated. Animal control has been called, but they're saying it will take at least 30 minutes for them to arrive. Panic began to spread through the courtroom. What kind of animal? Judge Anderson demanded. A mountain lion, sir. It appears to be wounded and frightened. We've evacuated the area, but it's cornered in the lower level. It's showing signs of aggression toward anyone who approaches. Before anyone could react further, Max suddenly became alert, his ears perked forward, nose testing the air. He let out a low sound, not quite a growl, but a vocalization that clearly indicated he sensed something no human in the room could detect. Sarah's eyes widened. Your Honor, Max can help. She looked at the judge with earnest determination. Please, let me try to calm the mountain lion. Dad taught me how to approach injured wildlife. That's absolutely out of the question, Thompson interjected. This is precisely why wild animals are dangerous and unpredictable. Now we have two predators to deal with. Judge Anderson raised his hand for silence, his gaze fixed on Sarah and Max. The Bobcat remained alert but calm, showing none of the agitation one would expect if he sensed a threat. Instead, he seemed concerned. Against all conventional wisdom and protocol, Judge Anderson made a decision that would later be discussed in legal circles for years to come. Officer, escort Miss Walker and her companion to the parking garage, but maintain a safe distance. At the first sign of danger, you are to remove her immediately. Is that understood? "Yes, Your Honor," the officer replied, though his expression betrayed his doubt about the unusual order. "Your Honor, I must protest in the strongest possible terms," Thompson began, but the judge cut him off. "Noted, Mr. Thompson. You're welcome to accompany us and observe from a safe distance." The judge stood, removing his robe. "Court is temporarily adjourned. We will reconvene after this situation is resolved." The unlikely procession, a small girl, a bobcat, a judge, a wildlife official, and several police officers, made their way through the courthouse corridors and down to the parking garage. The usually busy structure had been evacuated, and an eerie silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound of a police radio. On the lowest level, behind a row of parked cars, lay a mountain lion. The magnificent animal was clearly in distress, a large gash visible on its flank, likely from a fight or perhaps a collision with a vehicle. It growled weakly as it spotted the humans approaching, its tail lashing in warning. "Stay back," Sarah instructed softly. "Max and I need space." To everyone's amazement, the bobcat didn't show fear or aggression toward the much larger predator. Instead, he stayed close to Sarah, moving slowly and deliberately. "Your Honor," Sarah whispered, "do you have any food in your chambers? Something like beef or chicken?" Judge Anderson dispatched an officer to retrieve his lunch, a roast beef sandwich that he'd been saving for later. When the food arrived, Sarah carefully unwrapped it. Mountain lions, like all cats, are driven by two things when they're hurt: fear and hunger, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to address both." With agonizing slowness, Sarah began to move toward the injured animal, Max at her side. She tore off small pieces of the sandwich and tossed them, creating a trail leading toward the mountain lion. "It's okay," she called softly to the frightened animal. "We're not going to hurt you. Max is a friend, and I'm a friend too." The adults watched in tense silence as the girl and bobcat inched closer to the dangerous predator. The mountain lion's eyes darted between Sarah, Max, and the scattered food, its growls becoming less frequent as curiosity began to replace fear. When Sarah was about 15 feet away, she stopped and sat down on the concrete floor, making herself appear smaller and less threatening. Max sat beside her, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I'm going to help you," Sarah continued in the same soothing voice she'd used with Max in the courtroom. "You're hurt, and you're scared, but we can make it better." To the astonishment of everyone watching, the mountain lion's aggressive posture gradually relaxed. It sniffed cautiously at the nearest piece of food, then quickly devoured it. Bit by bit, it began to eat the trail of food, gradually moving closer to Sarah. Thompson watched in disbelief. "This is unprecedented," he muttered. "I've worked with wildlife for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." When the mountain lion was about 10 feet away, it suddenly tensed again, a low growl rumbling in its throat as it stared past Sarah at the watching humans. "Please, everyone step back," Sarah requested without turning around. "You're making him nervous." Judge Anderson gestured for everyone to retreat several paces, their eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before them. With the humans at a more comfortable distance, the mountain lion cautiously continued its approach until it had eaten the last piece of food, just 5 feet from Sarah. Then it stopped, its eyes, a deep golden amber, fixed warily on the girl and her bobcat companion. What happened next left even the most skeptical observers speechless. Max slowly rose and took 2 careful steps toward the mountain lion. The larger cat's ears flattened momentarily, but there was no aggression in its posture, only caution and curiosity. Max made a soft chirping sound, a vocalization that seemed to communicate directly with the injured predator. "He's telling him we want to help," Sarah explained, her voice barely audible. She reached slowly into her backpack and removed a small first aid kit. "Dad always said that animals can sense our intentions. If we're calm and we mean no harm, they can feel it." Over the next 20 minutes, with infinite patience and remarkable courage, Sarah talked soothingly to the mountain lion as she inched closer. Max remained a constant, calming presence, occasionally making those same chirping sounds whenever the larger cat showed signs of anxiety. Eventually, Sarah was close enough to examine the wound. "It's deep, but clean," she announced to the watching adults. "I think he was in a territorial fight with another mountain lion. He needs antibiotics and proper care, but I can clean and bandage it temporarily." With steady hands that belied her age, Sarah cleaned the wound with antiseptic wipes from her kit, applied antibiotic ointment, and managed to place a large bandage over the gash. Throughout the procedure, the mountain lion remained surprisingly calm, flinching occasionally but never showing aggression. "I think he understands we're helping him," Judge Anderson murmured, his voice filled with wonder. When she had finished, Sarah slowly backed away. "He needs proper medical attention. Can someone call Dr. Holloway at the Wildlife Center? He'll know what to do." Within the hour, Dr. James Holloway arrived with a transport cage and tranquilizer equipment, expecting to face a dangerous situation. What he found instead was a mountain lion lying relatively calmly next to a young girl and a bobcat. "Sarah Walker," the veterinarian said, shaking his head in amazement. "Your father would be incredibly proud of you today." With Sarah's help, they were able to sedate the mountain lion with minimal stress and load it safely for transport to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. To everyone's surprise, the mountain lion seemed distressed when separated from Max. "He's bonded with Max," Sarah explained. "Can Max come too? Just for a little while. I think it will help the mountain lion stay calm during recovery." Dr. Holloway looked to Judge Anderson, who was still technically presiding over the custody case for Max. The judge turned to Thompson, whose rigid opposition had visibly softened after witnessing the extraordinary events of the day. "Mr. Thompson, would you consider allowing a temporary delay in your petition while Max assists at the rehabilitation center? It seems we have an unusual situation that may benefit from an unusual solution." Thompson nodded slowly. "I've never seen anything like what I witnessed today. Perhaps there are exceptions to every rule." He looked at Sarah with newfound respect. "Your father taught you well, Miss Walker." At the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the mountain lion, now named Liberty by the staff, made a remarkable recovery with Max often lying near his enclosure, providing a strange but effective comfort to the larger cat. Dr. Holloway documented the unusual bond between the two wild felines, noting that Liberty's stress levels were measurably lower when Max was present. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen two different wild species bond this way," Dr. Holloway told Judge Anderson when he visited the center a week later. "It defies everything we think we know about wild animal behavior." Over the following weeks, Liberty's strength returned, and the time came for him to be released back into the wild. A suitable location was chosen in a protected wilderness area far from human habitation, but with abundant prey and water sources. On the day of Liberty's release, Sarah stood with Max, Aunt Clara, Judge Anderson, and even Mr. Thompson at the edge of a beautiful meadow ringed by ancient forest. Dr. Holloway opened the transport cage, and Liberty cautiously emerged, testing the air of freedom. The magnificent cat took several steps into the meadow, then turned to look back at the gathered humans and at Max. For a long moment, predator and humans regarded each other in silence. Then Liberty threw back his head and let out a powerful roar that echoed through the trees. Not a sound of threat, but almost like a farewell. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched Liberty bound away into the forest, his powerful form soon disappearing among the trees. "Goodbye," she whispered. "Be free and be safe." As they prepared to leave, Judge Anderson placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Your final hearing is scheduled for next week, but I think today has given us all something to think about regarding Max's future." Sarah looked up at him, hope shining through her tears. "Max helped save Liberty. Dad always said that sometimes animals and humans are meant to help each other. That's not interfering with nature, it's being part of it. Thompson, who had remained thoughtfully silent, finally spoke. Miss Walker, I entered this case believing there were no exceptions to wildlife regulations. Today, I'm not so sure. He knelt to be at eye level with Sarah. Would you and Max consider working with the Wildlife Commission occasionally? We could use someone with your unusual talents. A week later, in a much less tense courtroom, Judge Anderson issued his ruling. In the matter of Walker versus the State Wildlife Commission regarding custody of the bobcat known as Max, this court finds that exceptional circumstances warrant an exceptional ruling. He looked directly at Sarah. The bond between Miss Walker and Max is clearly unique, as is Miss Walker's demonstrated ability to care for and understand wildlife. He shuffled his papers and continued. Therefore, I am granting a special wildlife rehabilitator license to Sarah Walker, under the supervision of her guardian Clara Walker and Dr. James Holloway. This license allows Max to remain in her care while also establishing a legal framework for her remarkable gifts to benefit wildlife conservation. The courtroom erupted in applause as Sarah hugged Max, who seemed to understand the significance of the moment, rubbing his head against her arm in his typical display of affection. In the months that followed, Sarah and Max became minor celebrities in wildlife conservation circles. Their story inspired a special youth program at the Rehabilitation Center, where children learned about respectful interaction with wildlife under Sarah's guidance. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when Sarah and Max walked the forest paths on their property, they would hear a distant mountain lion's call echoing through the trees. Whether it was Liberty or another of his kind, Sarah liked to think it was a reminder that the boundaries between wild and tame, between animal and human, were perhaps not as rigid as people believed. In a world that too often separated nature from humanity, Sarah and Max had found a middle path, one of mutual respect, understanding, and the profound bond that can form when different species recognize something of themselves in each other.